When leadership frameworks rewrite lives, responsibility doesn't disappear. This is not about intent. It is about obligation. Leadership coaching frameworks often defend themselves by pointing to intent. The intention was growth. The intention was self-awareness. The intention was better leadership. Intent, however, is not the standard organizations are held to. Responsibility is. When a framework claims to reshape identity, meaning-making, and relationships, and that framework is adopted through organizational authority, the question is no longer whether it meant well. The question is who carries responsibility when outcomes are not benign. From language, to mechanism, to consequence. The first article examined what happens when coaching language is taken literally. The second examined what happens when identity change, celebrated in testimonials, produces harm rather than growth. This piece joins them at the point that is most often avoided. Accountability. Not personal blame. Not moral judgment. Structural responsibility. Leadership development does not exist in a vacuum. Frameworks promoted by organizations like the coaching room do not present themselves as optional self-help. They are embedded in executive coaching, leadership pipelines, learning and development programs, cultural transformation initiatives. They are adopted because leaders trust them. They are scaled because organizations endorse them. They are legitimized because they align with senior identity and language. Once that happens, the framework is no longer private. It becomes institutional. Identity-level frameworks change the risk profile. Traditional land D carries familiar risks. Poor training wastes money. Bad management harms morale. Identity-based leadership frameworks introduce a different category of risk. They redefine how people interpret conflict, reframe responsibility inward, reposition rupture as growth, normalize discomfort as progress, blur work and private life. When identity is the intervention, consequences are not confined to the workplace. That is not speculation. It is stated openly in testimonials. When leaders describe becoming different partners, parents, and people forever, the boundary has already been crossed. The responsibility gap. Here is the gap that none of the articles, testimonials, or models resolve. If a framework encourages identity change, that change is reinforced by organizational authority, and the outcome is relational harm rather than growth. Who is responsible? The framework quietly answers this question. Responsibility is internalized. The leader has more work to do. Others are resisting. The system is misaligned. The discomfort is part of the process. What never happens is a serious examination of whether the framework itself contributed to harm. That is not accidental. It is how closed systems protect themselves. Why testimonials are insufficient as safeguards. Testimonials are often used as evidence that programs are safe, effective, and transformative. They are not. They show only the experience of the person who changed, the meaning that person assigns to the change, the outcome as they perceive it. They do not show impact on dependence, cost to relationships, whether dissent was safe, whether alternatives were possible, whether harm occurred alongside growth. Using testimonials as justification for institutional adoption is not due diligence. It is narrative substitution. Governance standards do not disappear because language is soft. In any other context, organizations are expected to assess foreseeable harm, second-order effects, vulnerable parties, power imbalance, informed consent. Leadership coaching is often exempted from this scrutiny because it is framed as positive, voluntary, and developmental. But when participation affects advancement, language defines maturity, frameworks interpret resistance, identity is reshaped under authority, the voluntary argument collapses. This is no longer personal development. It is organizational intervention. And organizational interventions carry duty of care. the ethical line that keeps being crossed. The most concerning pattern is not that identity change occurs. It is that identity change is celebrated without boundary. No serious ethical framework treats permanent psychological change as unproblematic. No responsible governance model assumes downstream benefit without verification. No risk-aware system ignores impact on children, partners, or families. Yet leadership coaching routinely does all three. Not because of malice. Because the framework defines growth in a way that excludes accountability. Why reflection keeps being resisted. When these issues are raised using coaching's own language, the response is rarely engagement. It is deflection, or silence, or personalization. That reaction is telling, because the critique is not ideological. It does not attack intent. It does not deny positive experiences. It asks a question the framework cannot answer without changing itself. The question organizations must answer. If a leadership framework reshapes identity, reframes relationships, crosses into private life, and is institutionalized through power, what responsibility does the organization carry when the outcome is harm rather than growth? Until that question is answered directly, leadership coaching will remain an ethical blind spot, protected by good intentions and glowing testimonials. Responsibility does not disappear because the language is uplifting. It increases.